You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 21st of March 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello there and a warm welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Emma Nelson, and coming up on today's programme, Germany takes its final step to raise the debt ceiling. We'll examine the biggest fiscal expansion in the country's post-war history. Also ahead in the next 30 minutes, Heathrow is closed.
It's such a significant asset in the UK, not just because of all the passengers that go through it, but because of cargo that goes through it.
We'll look at what happens to global travel when one of the top 5 busiest airports in the world shuts its runways because of a fire in a nearby substation. We'll also hear the latest in the continuing decline in relations between the US and South Africa as the South African ambassador to Washington prepares to leave. And Carlotta Rebello is here with the latest urbanism news. Welcome, Carlotta.
Hi, Emma. Yes, from the British Library's expansion to New York ditching the Metro card, there's plenty to discuss in the urbanism world, including why people should be allowed to have fun in their cities.
We look forward to that. Thank you so much. That's all coming up right here on The Briefing with me, Emma Nelson. The final stage in Germany's lifting of its debt ceiling was reached this morning. The country's upper house, the Bundesrat, has agreed to alter the constitution to allow for greater spending on defence and infrastructure. Well, to bring us up to date, I'm joined now by Chris Cermak, Monocle's senior news editor. Good afternoon, Chris.
Good afternoon, Emma.
A huge day for Germany.
This is a very big day for Germany. It really has to be said, because it's a change in how Germany thinks about financing, and that's what's important. And the reason for that, if you will, it's shown by the fact that not only was sort of just a package of funding, of money approved today by the Bundesrat, but this was a constitutional reform, because this idea of a debt break, as the Germans call it, which basically says they are not allowed to spend money beyond, they have to balance the budget basically, unless there are certain things like a major economic crisis, that is now being eased for defense spending in particular. There will be a general allowance for additional defense spending that goes beyond balancing the budget, and then there will be a 500 billion euro package for just much needed investments in infrastructure, climate change, which the Greens wanted, a lot of different things in the German economy to get the German economy back on its feet. So this spending, it's a lot of money, it's a huge amount of money, but also it's just this change in thinking, the idea that a debt break is no longer as fixed as it once was.
It is almost unthinkable to imagine that the constitution of Germany has been changed, because it requires a 70% approval rating for any kind of change to happen within the Bundesrat.
It does in both houses, actually. So this is what was so interesting. It happened after the German federal elections back in February, which, as you know, I was in Berlin and we spoke about it back then. And they're doing that in this sort of in-between phase, which is interesting in itself, because some of the extreme parties, the right and the left, opposed this move. So this is why it's happening now, while the Bundestag, the lower house, still had an old set of majorities, which meant that the Christian Democrats, Social Democrats, and Greens together, the centrists, had the 2/3 that they needed. Now today they managed to get it passed in the Bundesrat, which is the upper house, and that's the states. And this basically also involved certain gimmies for the states. This is also significant for Germany, that for the first time individual states will also be allowed to borrow money. This was also something that was never allowed in Germany before, and this is one way that they got the states on board.
What does this now mean for Germany and its sort of political and indeed its financial identity, given the fact that prudence. I remember going into seeing a supermarket where sparen ist sexy, to save is sexy, was the thing that was the USP of a supermarket. The Germans are known for being frugal, and the fact that this debt ceiling has now been pushed up changes things permanently for the way that Germany thinks, doesn't it?
It does change it permanently. I think it depends on who you ask, and this is what part of the debate has been. Bavaria's governor, if you will, Markus Söder, has called this a German Marshall Plan, just to give you a sense of just how big, in a way, they are trying to make this. But at the same time, they have tried to emphasize that no, we are still going to stick to those fiscal rules to a degree. They're just carving out particularly defense and saying defense is necessary now, given what's happening in Europe, given what's happening in Ukraine. We must allow defense to be separate from that. The rest, it's a little more of a one-time massive 500 billion package, and then it's sort of this promise, no, we'll get back to normal spending after that. But it has caused a lot of discussion in Germany because it is such a big change. Brandenburg's governor, who opposed it, called it fiscal suicide. So it does show you just how wide a difference in opinion there is on this.
There are still big questions being asked, not least about this extra money that will now be allocated to defence, and questions being raised about how they spend any extra money. And it is a common question across any modern nation now, trying to make its military combat and to future-proof its military capacity. Do you spend money on tanks and traditional hard warfare equipment, which is what arguably is what's needed at the moment, given the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but also the future of Germany's military capacity? Is this AI? Is this cyber warfare, which is what we were all talking about before Russia invaded Ukraine?
Yes, absolutely. And one of the interesting debates around this was things like cyber and even civilian services and things like that, which was something that the Greens actually pushed to be included in this ending of the debt brake, if you will, or at least when it comes to defense, they asked and specifically got in that it wouldn't just be the hardware, it would be things like cybersecurity, civilian infrastructure related to wartime efforts and things like that as well. So this is a broad package, but yes, at the same time, to your point, a lot of the concerns around this was, if you will, that at the moment, this is a loosening of the fiscal rules. This is allowing for defense spending, but they haven't agreed on what they want to spend the money on yet. This is just a change in that principle to say we are now going to be spending money on defense. It's not just a one-time thing like Olaf Scholz's famous Zeitenwende change in Germany at the time of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This is now a permanent fixture that we're spending money. But again, to this point, Friedrich Merz, the likely next chancellor of Germany, he's still only the likely chancellor. There's not a government currently in Germany. They now have to sort out having a coalition government to govern Germany over the next 4 or 5 years. And those will be the people who then decide exactly how this money is spent.
While they're doing that, the role of Germany, the wider role of Germany in Europe, will be under intense scrutiny. We've seen in the last couple of weeks the rise of France in particular, Emmanuel Macron really taking the lead in terms of where he wants to position Europe, most notably when it comes to defence. Now that Germany has that extra spending power, what does that mean for Germany?
It means that, frankly, as even Friedrich Merz, the likely next chancellor, has said, that Germany is back. This is how he is putting it. This was a priority of his in the election campaign, and immediately after winning that election for the Christian Democrats, he said his priority was European defense. So he is putting himself out there as that leader in Europe. This is the position that he wants to take. And I think it's fair to say, at least at this point, that in contrast to Emmanuel Macron, who is taking this big lead with big words and promising troops and what he already has, Germany is now the one saying we are putting our money where our mouth is. We are now joining this party with money. But it will be interesting to see just how Friedrich Merz also politically is able to place himself into this discussion, whether he is going to kind of take that mantle from Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer, for that matter, if you will, as well, who have been leading this discussion of European defence going forward. Whether Germany now is the one that now takes that lead will remain to be seen.
Chris Cermak, thank you so much. You're listening to The Briefing with me, Emma Nelson, coming to you live from London. The time here in the British capital is 12:09. Let's have a look at the day's other news stories. Here's Monica Lillis with the headlines.
Thanks, Emma. Ukraine has accused Russia of blowing up its own gas pipeline in order to blame Kyiv and undermine the proposed energy ceasefire. New footage this morning shows a huge fire and a large cloud of smoke above Sudzha in Russia's Kursk region. The Sudzha pipeline has been a critical hub for Russian gas transit to Europe via Ukraine. South Korea's biggest defence group, Hanwha Aerospace, has said it plans to secure strategic overseas production bases in Europe, the Middle East, Australia and the US to meet growing demand. The announcement comes as the sector benefits from the Trump administration's shake-up of global security priorities. The original script for Breathless, the iconic French New Wave film made in 1960 by Jean-Luc Godard, is going up for sale. The only known script of A Bout de Souffle, its French title, is to be auctioned in Paris this year. It is estimated to fetch between €400,000 and €600,000, with bidding due to open in June. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Emma.
Thank you very much indeed, Monica. Now, Heathrow Airport is currently closed and is expected to remain so until at least midnight tonight. It's due to a fire at a nearby substation. And to bring us up to date, I'm joined now by Paul Charles, founder and CEO of the PC agency. Good afternoon, Paul.
Hello, Emma.
Simple question. How can a fire at a substation completely shut down one of the top 5 world busiest airports?
It does seem remarkable, doesn't it? This is such a critical piece of UK infrastructure. You would think that should a fire affect the power, the core power that's going into the airport, then there would be a backup system of some kind. Now, Heathrow understandably have been a little bit coy on the nature of their backup system, but there is a claim that that was also damaged. But such a fundamental piece of infrastructure like this should have a fail-safe backup system when so many airlines and thousands of passengers are affected by such a big piece of infrastructure in the UK.
It's not often that journalists feel in a position where they can use the expression travel chaos, but is this one of the occasions where it does fit the bill?
It does fit the bill. I remember the ash cloud back in 2010, the Icelandic ash cloud, which caused so much chaos around the world, and that closed airspace for several days. The reason why this is causing so much chaos is because of Heathrow's significance and its importance. It is a major hub. Many people don't just fly in or out of it, they transit through it as well. And as a result of that, that's why there is even more disruption, which is also affecting, of course, airports elsewhere in Europe who are having to take the aircraft which had to be diverted, that couldn't land at Heathrow early this morning.
Just outline how people go about, recalibrating very, very tightly managed flight schedules, because, to have such an enormous hub as Heathrow knocked out will get every airport in the world getting out a pencil and paper and working out how they're going to adapt at top speed.
Yes, I've worked with flight planners from my previous role working in Virgin Atlantic, and they're all expert teams, whichever airline they're working in. And the flight planners are at a bit of a loss at the moment because they've got no indication yet of when Heathrow is going to be properly opened up again. And it is going to be some time because of the significance of this outage. So when you're a flight planner, you're obviously working on the best information you've got to be able to plan where all the aircraft should be at any one particular time, where your flight crews are, where your pilots are, where your cabin crew are. And on a day-to-day basis, that's generally pretty seamless. But when you've got no information coming in from an airport as to when that airport will reopen, and you've got so many aircraft that normally flow through that airport, such as British Airways and Virgin Atlantic do, then you're at a loss. You can't do anything. So all the airline can do is put its planes on the ground, keep them there, and not move them until they get some information. And that is at huge cost.
Indeed. I mean, how much are we estimating this is going to cost, given the fact that this isn't just an outage for a couple of hours? We're talking about an entire day's operation at a weekend.
Absolutely. I mean, luckily, it's not Easter weekend or a big bank holiday weekend, so that does help a little bit. But there are still many thousands of people affected by this. I believe each day, due to the scale of it, will cost at least £20 million for the airlines to recoup somehow and for Heathrow to recoup. But of course, when you have a day of outage, that then knocks on for 3 or 4 days afterwards before aircraft are back in position. So one day may cost 20 million. Even if Heathrow was operating again later this evening, then you'd still have significant costs building up tomorrow and Sunday and Monday. So it's going to be some time and at great cost.
And at what point does people start pointing fingers and blaming each other, given the fact that we still don't know exactly what caused this fire? It is a huge fire, and there is a lot of speculation about as to why something like this could cause, could just go up in smoke.
Well, obviously the police are involved and the counter-terrorism police are involved, and it could be sabotage, but it may not be. We just have to wait and see, and can't really speculate on that. What I think will be important will be for the authorities as quickly as possible to look at how they get other backup systems and other power systems in place to get Heathrow up and running as quickly as possible. It's such a significant asset in the UK, not just because of all the passengers that go through it, but because of cargo that goes through it. Don't forget cargo, fresh fruit, electronics, all sorts of goods that are vital to the day-to-day economy are, have to get up and running again. So there are many reasons why they need to get the power back as quickly as possible.
Paul Charles, founder and CEO of the PC Agency, thank you for bringing us up to date. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Now, South Africa's ambassador to the US is on his way home, having been told to leave by the US Secretary of State that he was no longer welcome in the US. Marco Rubio described Ibrahim Rasool as a race-baiting politician who hates America and Trump. So to tell us what's happening now, I'm joined now by Tara O'Connor, Managing Director of Africa Risk Consulting, a pan-African risk management agency. Good morning. Good afternoon, Tara, I should say to you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
So while everybody is obviously paying great attention to this expulsion by Ibrahim Rasool, he's very relaxed about it. He's saying that he's all packed up and looking forward to going to South Africa, and that he was leaving the US with no regrets.
Well, I think doesn't really reflect the state of concern back home in South Africa amongst the coalition government, the government of national unity, which is dominated by the African National Congress, who are extremely concerned about the continuing deterioration of relationships with the United States. And particularly, most importantly, because a special trade arrangement deal between the US and South Africa, the AGOA trade arrangement, is due for renewal in August this year. And all the signs are pointing to the deterioration leading to the US not renewing the AGOA. And AGOA accounts for something like 100,000 jobs in South Africa and about $400 million of annual trade.
Just what's gone wrong here?
Well, I think a lot of things have gone wrong. I mean, there have been tensions between South Africa, even under the Biden administration. The Biden administration was very disappointed with South Africa, particularly around South Africa's treatment of Israel and the Israel issue. And you will remember that South Africa has brought a genocide case against Israel before the International Court of Justice. And also South Africa maintains relationships independently of international community with Iran, which is obviously one of US's particular adversaries. And so even in the Biden era, Biden time, South Africa was becoming relations between South Africa and the US were not great.
Explain, therefore, what happens next, because with Ambassador Rasool on his way home now, all packed up and ready to go, does there now, remain a vacancy, a vacuum in Washington for a South African voice, or do they send a replacement?
Well, I think they will be looking to send a replacement. I mean, the US relationship is far too important for South Africa not to have a replacement. And when I was in South Africa very recently, in fact, the last couple of weeks, the people that I met on the ground were saying, and particularly people from the Government of National Unity, were saying that they are playing a very strong role behind the scenes in order to restore relationships. Other relationships have gone bad, of course, because, Donald Trump issued an executive order accusing South Africa because he had earlier accused South Africa of seizing land from white farmers, which is completely incorrect. But so behind the scenes, there are lots of issues lobbying to try and correct the impression that the US president has of South Africa. But it remains to be seen. It's too important a relationship not to have an ambassador.
Indeed. I mean, we're seeing quite a lot of people being very critical of the US administration at the moment. And supporters of Ambassador Rasool are saying that he was dealt an impossible hand, having to deal with an openly antagonistic host nation. What does this say about the longer-term relations between South Africa and Washington?
Well, I think there will be problematic as long as Trump is in power. And we will wait and see what happens to the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA program. We've already seen a man born in South Africa, Elon Musk, through the Doge, actually slashing USAID, which has had an immediate and negative impact on HIV programs that were funded by the US across South Africa. So I think the tough hand played by the US will also be a bit of a wake-up call for South Africa. And because for many, many years, the ANC-led, that's the ruling party, the ANC-led foreign policy has really ignored the basis of trade. So the European Union is South Africa's main trading partner, and they're followed by the US. And so they're both important trade partners, but ANC-led foreign policy has never really taken that into account. And so now there will be, I think, an awakening and a realization that a more pragmatic foreign policy is probably essential. We've already seen a reaction and a response to the deteriorating relationship with the US in a long overdue visit by Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Union, who's actually restoring and stepping in, we think, where the US has left off.
Tara O'Connor, Managing Director of Africa Risk Consulting. Thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing. Now, the British photographer Martin Parr has an impeccable eye when it comes to capturing the tragicomic brilliance of everyday life. He's famous for his observational takes on his subject matter, human beings, and often those who'd not ordinarily find themselves in front of a camera. Well, now Martin Parr himself has become the subject of a new documentary about his life. In I Am Martin Parr, the director Lee Shulman takes him on a road trip across England to revisit the locations of his famous pictures. Well, Monocle's Hassan Anderson interviewed Lee and began by asking him if he felt any pressure when placing the photographer in front of the lens.
He's not a man of many words and hides himself, well behind the camera. We wouldn't know who Martin was in the road. He's not like a famous figure of art, but his work is well known. So I was thinking about it. I was thinking, oh my God, is this going to be complicated to do? But that's what's incredible about Martin is actually, I had no idea how he'd react to being in front of the camera. And to be honest, it was great. To be honest, it was better than I thought it would be, because in the end, he doesn't really care. When I was filming him, he didn't really care that I was filming him. When you make a film, in your documentary, you're hoping that you can become detached from your subject so you can get into intimate moments. And that was automatic with Martin, because the minute Martin's out with the camera photographing, he forgets about everything else. So, that was great fun, and absolutely, it was a great experience. Obviously, one of the prerequisites for doing this documentary is that I would go on this road trip with him, which he agreed to. So I knew that as a basis of the film would be great. That was one of the provisos of me doing the film, was that we would go on this trip together.
Your film is full of humour, much like Martin's photos. And I've heard you say that Martin could be the subject of one of his own shots. Was that a difficult thing for you to get right when making a film about him? Well,
I had in my mind, I've always been, we're all influenced by someone else. Martin's been influenced by other photographers, he tells it, and then I've been influenced by Martin. And so when I made the film, I had this idea that I would shoot it and it would be shot like a Martin Parr photograph, and that I would put him into his own photographs. I wondered how that would work out. What I noticed about Martin is that he gets close, as we see in the film. So when I was shooting him, I decided to get close. I think Martin always takes a step forward generally, which is always, you see him going forward. That's why in the film, I think, it was one of the things you always see him going through the frame and going forward. And that's his thing with Martin. He's always going towards the action and going to where it's happening and sees something and gets in the thick of it. So I had to emulate that and try and kind of become sort of possessed by the spirit of Martin to make this film. And that was a big idea, to kind of have the images reflect Martin's work.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of brings me on to one of the other parts of your film, which you explicitly address in the interviews, the controversy around some of Martin's work that he's run into for seemingly adopting a sort of sneering look at his subjects. And that's especially of working class or ordinary Brits. Do you think that criticism sort of has got it all wrong?
When he did his work, what's interesting is when he did his work in New Brighton on the working class, and he showed it around to the working classes in Liverpool and around there, they loved it. And it's only when it came to London and it went to the high society of the art world, where the people who had no knowledge of what was going on. So the answer, in some respects, is no. I mean, I don't think he's not sneering, and I think he's the opposite. I think he's just showing what was there. I think he wanted people to be aware of society in the larger picture. And he was also, making a document. He saw something. I mean, he's not from that class. He's very much a middle class guy. So I think maybe that's why he got the stick, because he wasn't from the working class. But when I've spoken to people, and in the documentary, we speak to Mark Bedford from Madness, who was from a working class background, and shows how much it reflected the society he lived in. So, I don't think he was actually. I think that's been a big misinterpretation of his work. Personally, that's how I see it. I mean, I definitely think that he just photographed what was happening. He wasn't making it up. It was there. I think comedy and tragedy exist in the same sphere. I think Martin's work is very much funny and tragic at the same time. But I think the greatest art in the world is. I think the greatest artist I know, I'm a big fan of Charlie Chaplin. He's my hero. And Charlie Chaplin does comedy and tragedy together. I mean, you don't get the guy, he's a homeless guy who's got all the misery of the world, and it's funny. And so it's that balance that's slightly uncomfortable. And I think that's maybe the criticism and the controversy, is that it's funny and it's sad at the same time, and people are conflicted between that. So, I think that's where, and I think humour is incredibly serious. In fact, the great political satire and where it's happening is in stand-up comedy today. That's where it's happening. So, and it's a tricky landscape as well today. Now, suddenly it's becoming more and more tricky. But I champion humour a lot, especially as a sort of moral high ground to say where we are and to also keep us in check. And we need it there. I think it's the balance that we need.
That was Lee Shulman talking to Monocle's Hassan Anderson about his new film, I Am Martin Parr, which you can see in cinemas now. You're listening to The Briefing. 12:29 here in London. Now joining me in the studio is Carlotta Rebello, Monocle's executive producer, who also makes Monocle's The Urbanism podcast. She's here with the latest from the world of cities. Hello, Carlotta. Good to see you.
Hi, Emma.
Right, where are we starting?
Well, we're starting very close to here at the British Library. It's just 2 stops on the tube from us. So the British Library, big news this week that they've announced a £1.1 billion extension. And this has been in the works for a while. The development was first proposed in 2017, but now we know the actual plans. And the investment comes from Japan's Mitsui Fudosan, which are a development investment property group. Now, the project entails a 12-storey new building, and this is to be built on land that's already owned by the British Library, north of their current location at St Pancras Station. And it's quite a mammoth project. It will provide, according to the announcement, 100,000 square feet for the library and 600,000 square feet for the office space. So this is not only the library space, but also office. So a proper mixed-use development, which will include the new headquarters for the Alan Turing Institute too.
This is wonderful news for people who think that libraries are important, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And if you look at the first mock-ups, the sketches, it plays, it's clear that the vision will play on the existing design language with the reds and the warm tones, but bringing it a bit of a different style. And also, it shows why libraries are important anchors for the community. The fact that they're including a commercial space in this new building to attract not only new life sciences businesses, but also residents to come and utilize the space. There'll be areas for community workshops, there'll be meeting rooms, new educational facilities. And I think it really goes to the point of libraries, despite the rise of digital and online, continue to be for so many people the place to gather, the place to meet. We need to remember the British Library also hosts several exhibitions. So this new additional campus will have new exhibition space. So overall, it's a really exciting story. And it will be a couple of years until it's actually done. It's set to be completed 2032 if there are no delays. So we shall see.
Indeed, it's absolutely wonderful news for London, and indeed for anybody who actually works in the British Library, which is lots and lots of people. It's sort of become a kind of de facto workspace for many of London's working community. Let's move to New York, where I think quite a few of us here in the London office had a slightly wry smile when we were talking about integrated transport networks. I mean, obviously that is a hot topic here at Monocle, but for years and years, if you want to get across London, you take your phone and you just tap in and tap out, and there we are. And as a result, we're a little bit sneery about other cities, possibly unjustifiably. New York's playing catch-up, isn't it?
Yes, New York is playing catch-up, and this is the news that the writing has been on the wall for a while, but it's finally been announced that the iconic yellow Metro card, which has become obviously a symbol of New York transit, is going to become a relic of the past, for lack of better words. So this system will be discontinued at the end of the year, with people being encouraged to use what they call tap and go, as we call it here, contactless. Now, we need to say that contactless has been slowly introduced in the New York City transit system in 2019. Obviously, then the pandemic happened, so the integration wasn't as fast as authorities were first hoping. And this is all part of the Omni, which is the One Metro New York, which is the project to integrate transport, as we were just discussing, for you to be able to use your phone, debit card, or an Omni card that you load up, like we used to have with the Oyster card here in London. But now the Metro card disappearing, it just means that it will force this transition for those who have been holding out and wanting to keep their paper card instead.
What about those people who want to keep their paper cards? Because there is always that jump that needs to be taken when we embrace technology, but there will always be those who are left behind.
Absolutely. And I think that's why it's so interesting that, like we still use, if needed, the Oyster card in London, you'll be able to have an Omni card that you can top up at stations. And as part of the Metro card being discontinued, new charging stations for the Metro card will be implemented that will take cash, and that people who do not want to use digital banking apps or their phones can use that instead.
And just in the grander scheme of things, I mean, when you travel and you look around and you realise actually how far ahead of the game London is. I mean, why does it take large cities such a long time to actually integrate this? Because I think the United Kingdom, well, London at least, has had it for a very, very long time. Step outside London, completely different story. But capitals, if you look at what's happening in Paris recently, they're way behind tap and go, aren't they? They've only just introduced the Navigo.
Well, and also in my home country, in Lisbon, for example, the contactless tap and go system was introduced in the metro just last year. And, it was all over the news, as it should be. But again, as you were kind of hinting at it at the beginning of our chat, I looked at it like, really? Only now? I think it is a mix of things. Some societies and some cities are more digitally minded, so they know that transition is not going to be as harsh on citizens. So there's a better digital literacy. And there's also the side of regulations. For a city like New York, for example, there's a lot of regulations to change anything that has to do with the financial system, what has to do with how people pay. So that's why the transition has been quite slow. That's the reason why the US still swipes and asks you for a signature for most of the payments. Whereas for us here, even introducing your PIN seems like something from the past, which is the in-between where they are and where we are. And obviously this is generalizing. I'm not saying that's all across the US. Of course, there are exceptions. But it has a lot to do with the regulations and different entities working with one another. And ultimately, it is really important to remember that not everyone has the same level of digital literacy, doesn't have the same access to digital tools. So having a safeguard, like a card that can be topped up with cash, is the way you bridge that gap and ensure no one is left behind.
Finally, we're all talking about how far ahead of the game London is, but they all want us to travel well, but be tucked up very early.
Yes, they want us to be really polite and really nice. Now, this is hinting at a story. It is a small London story, but I think it opens up quite an interesting conversation. So the Camden Citizen, the local paper, has reported on this restaurant, Georgian-inspired restaurant, King Cali, who it's based in Fitzrovia, and they've committed the grave sin of applying for a license so that they can sell alcohol until 1:30 a.m. The restaurant famously is open until 2 a.m. and they want to move into this, late night bites, refreshment type of establishment. And we must say, not every night, just on Fridays and Saturdays. And this has caused major uproar with the local community. They're saying the quote that the newspaper has is, Fitzrovia is not Soho, and how it will transform the area into a booze alley, a slippery slope, they say. And I find this quite interesting. They complain that they are already disturbed by patrons, high-spirited talking and laughing. So this is the complaint. You can't talk, you can't laugh. Like, when I saw the story, I was like, okay, it has to do with antisocial behavior. People maybe, leaving bodily fluids on the street after drinking a bit too much. But no, it's just because people are talking and laughing. And I think at the end of the day, we sometimes fall into the trap of not treating people as adults, and everyone has the right to enjoy their city. And a Friday and a Saturday, we're not talking about buying drinks to take out on the streets. If they're going for a late bite, to be able to enjoy a beer. London's nightlife has been not great over the past couple of years, despite several attempts to make it better. And it's difficult anywhere to find a decent place to eat past 10 p.m. And I think if we are going to have a serious conversation about London truly becoming a 24-hour city, we need to allow people to have fun if they want to. We need to allow people and restaurant owners and business owners to allow people to come into their businesses instead of, forcing people outside, and that's what leads to antisocial behaviour.
I think if London is looking for a new nightmare, they might just have found it. Carlotta Isabella will have to stop there. Thank you so much for joining us in the studio. And that's all the time we have for today's edition of The Briefing. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producer Hassan Anderson. Our researcher was Francesca Jilks and our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield. The Briefing's back on Monday at the same time, but for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.